Hello neighbor, I'm Robert Burns, and I wanted to take just a few minutes to bring you up to speed on the corruption train that Governor John Bel Edwards is now building up speed for in the early months of his administration. Now, first of all, let me just say this. Marvin Henderson was served with the federal fraud lawsuit that has been filed against him as a third-party defendant. He was served on that lawsuit on June the 25th at 9:32 a.m. and we'll give you a direct link for that. The interesting there is that it's his own son, Jeff Henderson, that basically said, hey, Daddy was out here making all these commitments when he didn't represent our company. He had no ownership interest, nor was he an officer. And that's being represented in pleadings by Jeff Henderson, who is a member of the Auctioneers Licensing Board. Well, guess what, Jeff? Last time I checked, it takes two to tango. So if you're now basically saying your own father was out here obligating your company when he had no such authority, you just stood by and let it happen? Next, to bring you up to speed, we have a revelation by the executive director of the LALB, Ms. Sandy Edmonds, that she has been aware that the residence of the longtime chairman, Tessa Steinkamp, does not pair up with the voter registration. And said, hey, it's voter registration, not residency, that determines your public service district. Well, guess what, Ms. Edmonds? Your residency and your voter registration ought to coincide. Yet we have an email from you to the two attorneys basically acknowledging that I guess they don't. All right, now that's going to take me on to talk a little bit more about Ms. Edmonds and Reverend Freddie Lee Phillips. As most of you will recall, when we videotaped Governor John Bel Edwards at the May 9th, 2016 press club meeting, he was asked about the blatant payroll fraud. Back in November the 20th of 2010, Reverend Phillips went to the Civil Service Accountability Section, Patrick Lowry. Patrick Lowry felt strong enough that the evidence that was submitted did tend to substantiate payroll fraud, especially if it was verified. And so he had Reverend Phillips take that information on to the legislative auditor. The legislative auditor was already questioning the absurdity of all of this, but the LALB went forward with the pay raise, and let's break away and give you a brief clip to see the board granting this pay raise and Reverend Phillips in opposition to it.
We're talking about the salary.
Correct, that's okay. I'm dealing with the salary issue.
My motion is to give her a 10% increase based on legality of the state law.
Yeah, pending,
Pending whatever legality is. That's my motion.
10%.
Okay.
I second it.
Do you have a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay.
Nay.
Freddie opposed?
Yeah.
All right, so you've seen that little pay raise episode. Now, Miss Edmonds was becoming uneasy with Reverend Phillips and his propensity to request documents, and therefore she submitted a proposal for the LALB to start destroying records. Let's take a look at that clip, and you'll see Reverend Phillips's opposition to it as well.
I make a motion that we adopt the records retention schedule
And the destruction of records.
and the destruction of records.
That's the last one.
Because we're not talking about a lot of file boxes or anything else like that.
And
About,
Because it's not about destroying various files. I mean, it's not like
certainly they're not taking up space, but the issue is that every time there is a records request, we have records in that office back to 2000 right now.
Correct.
No other office in the state of Louisiana maintains their records that far.
Correct.
So I am time and time again having to go through those same boxes to pull documents that we shouldn't even have.
You know what I'm saying?
I've
But
got
this is
several.
just- I'm
They
just
may
saying,
not be
just
from
one,
you,
just
but your
one.
friend in crime back there, I shouldn't say friend in crime, there's no crime, but your partner back there, who take turns requesting documents regularly go back.
Well, I mean, and how often have you had to do this since you were in office?
Several.
No, I'm talking about since you've been here at this office. How many
Several.
times? So you had
All right, so as you can see by the little video clip, Reverend Phillips was none too pleased at this business of Miss Edmonds selectively destroying records. That didn't sit well with Reverend Phillips, so his suspicion got even more heightened, and he decided it'd probably be a good idea for him to start to look at all the checks that go out of the LALB's office. And you're not going to be, hey, videos don't lie, folks. you're going to see the LALB tell him, specifically Tessa Steinkamp, a central figure now, and Greg Bordelon and others tell him, you're not looking at any checks unless this board approves you to do so by way of a motion. Let's take a little break so you can see that particular episode of Reverend Phillips saying, I expect to see the checks going out of this place as the Secretary Treasurer. Let's break for that clip.
The record, because of checks and things of that magnitude, in which mine, by me, holding office, Secretary Treasurer, I request that I see an itemized breakdown of checks that are written in and out of this office. Also, as a part of my function, since I'll be held liable for that, I want to make sure that I see the checks and also that I see a copy of the expenditures that leaves out of the office.
You want to make that in a motion?
Well, I mean,
Have to.
it's not, it doesn't have to be a motion.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's the principle that because of my
No, it
position.
does have to be a motion, actually.
No, not to be voted on as Secretary Treasurer. This is
No.
things that I have to be accountable for. So I'm asking Ms. Evans that she supply me with that because that's my position on this board.
You have to make a motion.
Not
So
for
the
that.
board has to vote on it.
Not for that. Not for something that's under my jurisdiction.
So we go back and vote.
I do whatever I'm instructed to do, so if you're looking to
We
me
have
for
to
an
vote on
answer.
that.
All right, I wasn't kidding with you, was I? They told you, hey, you're not seeing any checks unless we authorize you, unless we vote as a board to let you see checks. I don't make this stuff up, folks. I just film it. Okay. Chief of Accountability, Patrick Lowry, said, look, this may take a while for the legislative auditor to do. Let's see about getting Paul Gates in. And so at the very next meeting, the clips you've just watched transferred at the January 2011 meeting. At the March 2011 meeting, Paul Gates did have strong interest in this, and let's break away and see the WAFB Channel 9 news crew dropping in on the LALB. Let's break away for that brief clip.
It says that, sorry Anna, I didn't mean for that to fly.
That's fine.
towards you. Let's see. Let's see, let me just start reading and I'll find it. Let's see, out loud. If the applicant of renewal of a license has not been made, the license shall expire on December 31st, and it shall be illegal for any person to represent or act as an auctioneer thereafter. Any auctioneer who submits a renewal application after January.
So you've seen Paul Gates and his crew coming in. Now, very unfortunately, folks, for those of you not in the Baton Rouge viewing market, Paul Gates was diagnosed with Alzheimer's literally while he was doing this investigative report. To my knowledge, it is the last investigative report that he worked on. As a result of his diagnosis, he said, Robert, we're just going to have to let the Legislative Auditor's Office handle this. Let's shift our focus now on to New Orleans auction galleries. I'll briefly tell you that was what was a very prominent firm that was conducting auctions in New Orleans. They ran into serious problems, over $500,000 of unpaid consignors, a company operating expenses being paid out of consignor escrow funds, and for a long time, Tessa Steinkamp, the chairman of the LALB, had served as the vice president, director, treasurer in New Orleans auction galleries. They let her go shortly before the bankruptcy filing on April 1st. They hired her back shortly after it. Curious timing as to why you would do it right before and then rehire after. But at any rate, Ms. Steinkamp makes it clear she's going to need to recuse herself from discussions about New Orleans auction galleries. This is from the June 2011 LALB meeting. Let's watch Ms. Steinkamp indicate she needs to recuse herself.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay.
I'm not on the board of directors or anything with New Orleans auction. I'm simply an employee, but I'm recusing as a board member when New Orleans.
And all I can do is give it.
Next, I want to take you on to a little clip from that same meeting, June 2011, wherein Miss Edmonds downplays all that's going on in New Orleans auction gallery. She said, oh, we've only heard from 5 people, and not even all of them filed complaints. So let's take a brief little look at Miss Edmonds downplaying what all's going on at New Orleans auction galleries.
Because I know there was a list of what I saw on page system, a lot of consigners. You only mentioned that 5, but I mean.
They file complaints with
That's
us.
filed complaints with the board.
I have a list of,
It's actually
St.
five
Charles.
contacted us. 5 contacted us, not even all 5 filed complaints.
All right, so if you go by Miss Edmonds, there's not really all that much going on at New Orleans auction galleries. But let me just mention one gentleman. He's a gentleman named Danny Punn. Danny Punn. Danny is a gentleman who bid on the very last auction the New Orleans Auction Gallery did prior to them filing bankruptcy. He paid approximately $130,000 for a chicken blood stone as well as a jade table, both of which turned out to be complete fakes. And so we'll give you the link both for Mr. Punn's subsequent lawsuit with the bankruptcy court as well as a complaint that he filed with the LALB. But what I want to do right now is let's go in and see Miss Edmonds and Miss Dow explain this away that, oh, it's just got to do with authenticity of merchandise, and you'll even hear we don't get involved in that. Let's break away for that clip.
Because the getting paid is not the issue.
Oh, we have one more, excuse me, that's on an issue of validity of the item that he purchased. As you know, unless he comes in with something proving that it's not what it says it is, we normally assume that's a contractual matter. We do not get involved until the end of it. Had one complaint from a buyer, and that had to do with the authenticity of an item that was totally unrelated to the bankruptcy.
Yes, sir.
And
Yes,
that's being handled separately.
Yeah,
We're going to take you to the May 2016 meeting. It's the one that's most recently been conducted, and it involved a consent agreement with Brian Hammock. Now, Brian Hammock is a Virginia auctioneer who does not author Miss Dow's paycheck. So let's see what she's got to say about Brian Hammock when she says she believes he was a little misleading about the merchandise, and that is viewed as issuing false and misleading reports to the public. Let's see what she had to say about Mr. Hammock. Let's break away for that brief clip.
With regard to number 2, efforts to deceive or defraud the public, based on the investigation, we had a problem with the items, particularly in this auction, in that it said it was basically came from the state of a prominent plastic surgeon or received by the U.S. government. Our investigation revealed that the items at the auction had been seized in 2002. And we don't know where they've been since then, but that we found that to be somewhat misleading.
All right, so you ought to be able to tell the difference when it is New Orleans Auction Galleries and Tessa Steinkamp who writes her paycheck. All of a sudden it's oh, well, we don't get involved in that sort of thing. Never mind that the guy bid $128,000 on stuff that was basically worthless, okay? But when it's an out-of-state auctioneer that's not writing Miss Dow's paycheck, you can see the kind of disparity that I am, obviously making plain by way of these videos. Now, that involves Danny Punn. Let me just say this. Reverend Phillips was beginning to dig around into the New Orleans Auction Gallery records, and he brought up a gentleman named Mossad Puritan. Although he didn't know the name at the time, he mentioned a Los Angeles lawsuit. Now, Miss Steinkamp has said she should recuse herself, but she quickly jumps in on this to tell you that it's not important. It's not important. So let's break away for that brief clip of the Mossad Puritan lawsuit, though it's not mentioned by name.
no pending suits or anything that's on the table.
It was
Okay, because I know there was something about a California base. I saw that.
California?
Yeah, I thought I saw something in there concerning a California-based company investor.
No, not this. The proceeding in July is on a local company.
You're mistaken. I know what you saw, but it has nothing to do with an investment.
Okay, well, I'm just going through. I'm just reading this.
I know,
as I got it.
I know.
And it may be
it's
this
real
whole-
confusing, but that has nothing to do with
Well,
what
I
you're
mean-
talking about.
All right, so you have seen that Mossad Puritan reference to the lawsuit, and Miss Steinkamp, who said she needed to recuse herself, she then says, oh, it's not relevant. Well, we're going to give you the link for Mr. Puritan's lawsuit. It happened to entail litigation filed in 2008 that clearly Miss Steinkamp knew about. She says, oh, I know what you're referring to. That involved paintings that had been auctioned off by New Orleans Auction Galleries back in 2008. They arrived with Christie's rejection stickers on them, and yet New Orleans Auction Galleries went ahead and auctioned them anyway, and poor Mr. Puritan out in California bid $114,000 based on the catalog representation that these were authentic when they were in fact fake. So, as I'm telling you now, Reverend Phillips is delving into this pretty deeply on the New Orleans Auction Gallery situation, and I want to remind you that Ms. Steinkamp had said, you saw the clip, she said she was going to need to recuse herself. Let's move to the July 2011 LALB meeting. Now, Reverend Phillips says time to delve into, and he's got a few things he'd like to say, all right? Now, bear in mind, Ms. Steinkamp is supposed to be recused herself. You heard her say it. Let's see what Ms. Steinkamp's got to say as Reverend Phillips starts to address some of his concerns with New Orleans Auction Gallery. Let's break away for that clip.
Add this into the record.
You need to say it.
Yeah, on personal first. I want the LAB to be aware of this fact.
Before you make a, what are you making a point of
Personal privilege.
Okay, Freddie, I just want to make sure, before you make any points of personal privilege, that you understand code number 3121, that any false testimony that you give to this board could result in disciplinary action against your license.
That's no problem.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
I just merely want the board to be aware of Ms. Steinkamp's assertion made to Mr. Jacob Kansas, which she relayed repeatedly, that the funds would become forthcoming on the March 14th, 6 days before. Ms. Steinkamp said that the check would be cut in the mail to Mr. Jacob Kansas.
All right, I'll just ask you, does that sound like recusing to you? Threatening a man with his license? Wow, if that's your definition. First of all, Ms. Steinkamp has no business even being in the room for these sorts of discussions, okay? Yet she says she's going to recuse herself, and what is she doing? She is threatening Reverend Phillips's auction license. And don't sit for a second and think that Ms. Dow didn't have a role in it. When she flipped that over and was able to cite the statute, do you think Tessa Steinkamp knows these statutes by heart like that? I can tell you she doesn't. She was prompted by Anna Dow. If he brings anything up, cite him with this. We'll look at yanking his license. All right? I ask again, does that sound like recusing to you? Because it damn sure doesn't sound like recusing to me. Now let's move on to that. Let's move on to the March 2012 LALB meeting. Again, Ms. Steinkamp is supposed to be recusing herself with regard to New Orleans auction galleries. But let's take a look. Here I am attempting to videotape. They're going to be discussing a stipulation agreement with regard to Gene Vito's and New Orleans auction galleries, and Steinkamp says, oh, no, sir, you're not plugging into a utility outlet to videotape this thing. Now let's watch this little clip where they actually have the sheriff, who you can hear him on the clip apologizing to me, saying he's just following orders, but you will see this brief clip wherein I say, look, I intend to videotape this, and the sheriff literally had to pull the plug on my camcorder. Let's take a look at that clip. He's informed me that I cannot plug this in, so.
You have to have a seat.
Yeah.
Well, I can pull the seat over here.
You have to have a seat.
Well, about the issue of plugging in, he said I can't plug this in.
That's correct.
I would just ask the president, in changing venues, is there a reason why that we just decided not that he can do that?
Oh, no problem. I know you're just doing what they say. No problem. I know you're just following orders.
I'll make the motion to let him be able to plug in, to exempt that meeting rule, that if we have somebody that wants to videotape and they need a battery accessibility or a plug-in, that we let them plug into an outlet if we have an outlet available, as long as it's not against the meeting vote. That's a motion.
Do you have a second?
I got a question.
I'm sorry, there's no second. You may not discuss it. Pretty quick.
Well, I stood up to be recognized.
Okay. I recognize you, but I can't recognize you on this point because I do not have a second.
All right, there again, I will ask you, does that sound like recusing yourself to you? You saw the video. Now let's advance on just a few months to November of 2011. You know, you've seen Miss Edmonds downplaying the New Orleans auction gallery. Oh, we only had 5 people, and not even all of them filed complaints. I'm going to tell you, there was a quid pro on her doing that, and you're going to see that in this next brief clip from November of 2011, where it is Miss Steinkamp who up and says, this is my proposal. I'm the one that is insisting that Miss Edmonds get another $2,500 raise. So remember, the legislative auditor thought it was absurd at $20,000 for 15 hours a week. Then it goes to $22,000 for 15 hours a week. Now you're going to watch a clip with Miss Steinkamp ramrodding down another $2,500 for Miss Edmonds, and you'll see Reverend Phillips' opposition to it. Let's break away for that clip.
For Sandy Edmonds' compensation. I made this, I added this is my motion that I'm making because I would like to increase Sandy Edmonds' compensation by $2,500 annually. Freddie, I think she's doing an excellent job. I think she's a very hard worker. So I am recommending with her responsibilities that she gets a $2,500 annual increase in salary. The board can vote on it for
But my question is still the same. You're saying this, you don't bring any evaluation, you don't bring anything that...
All those in favor of the basic motion to give Sandy Edmonds a $2,500 a year raise will vote by roll call vote.
Mr. Bordelon?
Yes.
Mr. Lister?
Yes.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mr. McMillan?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
No.
Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Ms. Steinkamp?
yes.
Motion carried 6-1.
All right, you've seen once again, despite Reverend Phillips's opposition, Ms. Steinkamp insisted on ramming down another $2,500 pay raise for Miss Edmonds. Now, it was at that point that the legislative auditor said, all right, this is getting completely out of hand. As I told you, they were in disbelief at what all they were seeing by way of these videos. They saw that video. They came in and conducted their investigation. It became a higher priority because this board was given pay raise after pay raise after pay raise. And so they came in and they did their investigation. We're going to give you a link for all the legislative auditor's findings, and you can click on the link. Basically, now get this, all right? Legislative auditor saying that this woman is not entitled to accrue annual leave, which Daryl Prepare found it incredible that let me get this straight. This woman can be out laying on a beach for a week, and she's actually accruing leave to be able to take vacation time when what she is doing is vacationing. Earning annual leave while you're vacationing, reporting that you're on the clock. It's one hell of a racket if you can pull it off, isn't it? All right, so the legislative auditor comes out with its report. We're going to give you a direct link to that report. It came out in March of 2012, and they said that, hey, this is irresponsible, but as most folk do, the legislative auditor can only issue a report. But they did refer the matter on to District Attorney Hiller Moore for looking at criminal prosecution of Miss Edmonds. Daryl Prepare did tell me that, well, we got one big problem in that, Robert, and that the entire board is given a permission to do this. It was clear dereliction of their obligations. By the way, Patrick Lowry also said of both boards, not just the Auctioneers Licensing Board, but also the Interior Design Board, he said, and I quote, "How could any board be so stupid as to permit something like this?" End quote. So at any rate, the legislative auditor issues its report. Prepare sends it on to District Attorney Hiller Moore for criminal prosecution. Moore sends it on to the Inspector General's office. Inspector General's office conducts a lengthy investigation behind the scenes. They see that she in fact is doing these things, laying out on the beach, going off on various vacations. They issue their report. We'll give you a link to it. But here's the deal. How does the LALB react to the report? Well, I'm going to show you, because that would be at a meeting in May of 2014 in which, you got it, they gave her another pay raise. Yes, sir. The rate's up to, I don't know, 32 some odd dollars an hour now. But the interesting thing, you're going to watch Miss Steinkamp say that there have been some erroneous figures thrown about. But, she said irresponsibly. And you'll see a little follow-up clip that I did in addressing her concerns in that regard. So let's break away for that clip.
Not that hourly fee that's being thrown around so irresponsible.
And I think that
Who's been bantering those numbers about? Who? I'll tell you who. The legislative auditor is the one who's been bantering those numbers about. This is from their report. I'll provide you with a link to it so you can see the page. So you can see the highlighted number.
All in favor? Opposed? Ayes have it.
All right, you have seen Ms. Steinkamp say that, hey, there have been some erroneous hourly figures thrown out. Hey, I made the point that, hey, if they're erroneous, it's Darrell Preparer of the Legislative Auditor's Office. You know, are you accusing him of throwing out erroneous figures? Because he's a pretty intelligent guy, a pretty sharp CPA. He's not put in that Legislative Auditor's position for nothing, okay? But Ms. Steinkamp says he doesn't know what he's talking about. All right, now, when a number of auctioneers saw that latest pay raise, some of them communicated to me that this was absolutely absurd. And they said, well, you know, what next? Next they're going to be delivering caviar to her home, you know, where she at least says sometimes she works. And so I let that be known to the auctioneer licensing base that, you know, hey, what next? Y'all going to show up with caviar for Miss Edmonds? Let's break away for the final clip of this series, and you will see the LALB and the LAA jointly deliver caviar to Miss Edmonds at the conclusion of a board meeting. Let's break away for that clip.
We got a presentation.
Do I have a second? All in favor, say aye.
We have a presentation. Sandy can't make it because of weather. I bought her some caviar.
What is it? Oh, he brought Sandy's caviar.
All right, folks, that's going to give you some idea of what all has been going on with this board. Reverend Phillips fighting tooth and nail to try to have integrity on that board, especially when he was a member. But I'm here to tell you, the opposition forces, those that have tried to cram corruption through that board time and time and time and time and time and time and time again, they don't give up. They leaned on Governor John Bel Edwards, and we're going to wrap this whole video up with Governor John Bel Edwards saying, I had to rescind some. Why did you have to rescind somebody? Oh, I was accommodating those that have bent my ear that said, we don't want Reverend Phillips on that board. And I think you've seen why. And you'll see Governor John Bel Honor Code Edwards saying, I had to rescind somebody, and I rescinded yours. And that will conclude this video presentation about the Governor John Bel Edwards auction corruption train. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm Reverend Freddie Phillips, the one that we rescinded the order on. You have a problem with that?
And I had to rescind one, and I rescinded yours.